So my coffee is currently going cold, which is pretty much a guarantee every time I sit down and research something. It was a Tuesday night, and I was sitting at my kitchen table reading through old Pennsylvania newspapers, specifically the Bucks County Gazette from February 3rd, 1876. I was looking into the history of Pennsylvania spiritualism, the séance movement, the 1870s, that whole post-Civil War moment when an enormous number of Americans were genuinely convinced the dead could talk to the living. If you've ever spent time in that corner of history, you know how fascinating it is. Not because I think they were right, necessarily, but because of why they needed it to be true. The country had just lost so many people. The grief was massive, and the culture didn't really have a framework for it. So people sat in dark rooms and waited to hear something. Anyway, this particular issue from February 3rd had this great cluster of articles exposing fraudulent mediums. It laid out the whole apparatus of illusion in detail. Hidden panels and ghost cabinets used to produce spirit hands, artificial flowers secretly scattered across the floor. From a psychological standpoint, the mechanics of a manufactured belief are endlessly interesting to me. How hard people needed it to be real. Anyway, I'm in the zone, reading all of this, and then I hit this tiny article, just a few lines. It said a group of Brooklyn Spiritualists had been trying to contact the spirit of a murdered man, and their sessions were producing nothing but disconnected, senseless gibberish. And I just stopped. Who was the murdered man? Why were Brooklyn Spiritualists trying to reach him specifically? What had happened that was so recent, so present in the public mind that a spiritualist circle made it their project to contact him? His name was William Simmons. I had never heard that name. I didn't know the story. And I sat there with that cold cup of coffee and thought, well, apparently this is where my brain goes on a Tuesday night. Why have I never heard of this? So naturally, I completely fell down the rabbit hole. Hi, welcome back to This Might Be Nothing, but I'm Ashley, and this is a special side quest episode. If you're new here, this show is usually a mix of psychology, folklore, dreams, neuroscience, and the strange corners of history where all those things converge. And I'm not a scientist or a paranormal investigator. I'm an elder law professional from Bristol, Pennsylvania, who spends way too many evenings reading 19th century newspapers and thinking about memory, meaning, and the things we choose to believe. Sometimes the rabbit holes are exactly what I expect, and sometimes, like this time, I start pulling one thread and end up somewhere completely different, somewhere I wasn't looking for, and honestly, somewhere I'm still thinking about weeks later. This episode started as a folklore research, but it became something else. This isn't a true crime episode. I have enormous respect for people who do that work carefully and responsibly, and while this story has elements that fit the genre, that's not the lens we're using. This also isn't a ghost story, exactly, although it's adjacent to one. It's a story about what history chooses to remember, about the people who end up in the historical record simply because something terrible happened near them, and about one specific person, a little girl, who I could not stop thinking about once I found her. Our story takes place in Brooklyn, New York in January of 1876, and it begins with the human head. Picture Greenpoint, Brooklyn in the winter of 1876. Not the Greenpoint of today. No coffee shops, waterfront parks, or trendy boutiques. This is an industrial neighborhood at a full roar. The East River waterfront is lined with shipyards and ironworks. The air smells like coal, smoke, the river, and that heavy manufacturing scent that you just get used to when you live inside it. The Continental Ironworks was right there. The same facility that built the USS Monitor during the Civil War. So you have a sense of the scale. Rope factories, glassworks, chemical plants, the Inglis and Sons shipyard at the foot of Milton Street, right on the water. The 17th Ward, as it was called then, had roughly 30,000 people crammed into dense working-class housing, mostly Mostly German and Irish immigrants who came to Brooklyn to work with their hands 6 days a week, in exchange for wages that could disappear the second the economy turned. And the economy had turned. In 1876, it is now year 3 of the Long Depression. It started with the financial panic of 1873 and dragged on until 1879. At the time, it was the worst economic downturn America had ever seen. Banks failed, railroads collapsed, and unemployment was catastrophic. People who had been doing fine were suddenly scrambling. So picture the industry, the density, the economic pressure, the cold. Picture the cold. And now, picture the morning of January 31st, 1876. A worker at the Inglis and Sons shipyard goes out onto the lumber yard and finds something in the snow. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which, for my money, is one of the great underappreciated historical newspapers, just incredible reporting, called what followed the Greenpoint Horror, describing it as gruesome as anything ever imagined by Edgar Allan Poe. They found a human head wrapped in a piece of German language newspaper left at the edge of a lumberyard near the waterfront. It belonged to a middle-aged white man. No body, just the head. And that was the beginning. The police were called, the Eagle was on it, and by February 1st, it was a national story. The question, of course, was, whose head was it? And the answer to that question is where we meet William Simmons. He was 44 years old. He had served in the 10th Connecticut Infantry during the Civil War, which means he survived that, which was no small feat. He was a Mason, a member of King Hiram Lodge, with a wife and 5 children back home in Derby, Connecticut. He worked at a farm called Jones and Henry in Greenpoint, making carriage axles, earning $40 a week, genuinely good, skilled labor money in 1876. He lived apart from his family only because the work was in Brooklyn, and he was sending his wages home. He boarded at 154 North First Street with a man named George M. Beck. Beck later testified at the trial that Simmons was never drunk, never missed work, and was always home by 9 in the evening. Beck also mentioned something else. He said that whenever Simmons went to visit friends, he always brought a doll for the little girl. I'm going to come back to that. Those friends lived at 93 North 3rd Street. The man of the household was a German immigrant named Andreas Fuchs, though he was also known in the reporting as Victor Kretz. That alias just sits there in the record, unexamined, and it's genuinely unsettling. People have aliases for reasons, but the record doesn't give us this one. What we do know: Fuchs was about 40, stocky, with black hair, a dark mustache, and a tattoo on his arm. He was born in... I'm gonna butcher this, but that's okay. You'll see why. He was born in Alsace, a region annexed by Germany after the Franco-Prussian War, so his national identity was already complicated. He earned about $2 a day and had no relatives in America. He was married to Mary Webb, an Irish Catholic woman from County Waterford. Her first husband, Michael Kehoe, had died before the story begins. Mary came to Brooklyn, remarried Fuchs, and lived with him on the North 3rd Street. And she had a daughter, Ellen Kehoe, 8 years old. Her real father was the late Michael Kehoe. She lived with her mother and her stepfather, Andreas Fuchs. So she was the little girl the doll was for. Fuchs and Simmons had a complicated history. They had a falling out about 6 months prior. The papers don't spell out why, but they had since reconciled. By late January, things seemed fine and they were socializing again. On the evening of Thursday, January 27th, 1876, Fuchs, Mary, and Simmons were drinking together at the apartment. Simmons brought the doll for Ellen, and the little girl went to bed around 9 o'clock. At some point after that, Mary was sent out to get more beer. I'm going to let the newspaper record carry what happened next because I don't want to dramatize this. The Brooklyn Daily Times and the Eagle reported the physical evidence found when police searched the apartment on February 1st. A hammer, an axe, a handsaw, all bloodied, a trunk placed inside a tin broiler in the oven, organs on the stove, bone fragments in the grate. The floor had been scrubbed, according to a detective, almost white. The head found at the shipyard had been wrapped in that German newspaper and carried to the waterfront by a man seen walking alone in the early morning hours. Someone was watching, so he abandoned it at the lumberyard and walked home. The thighs were found later, separately, in the meadows near Newtown Creek. Mary's account in the Brooklyn Daily Times was that she went for beer, returned, went to sleep, and woke up the next morning to find the body. Fuchs, she said, threatened to, quote, serve her the same way, end quote. The next day, January 28th, Fuchs walked to Simmons' boarding house and told the landlord, quote, no Simmons, no money, end quote. And that's where Fuchs' defense would later rest in its entirety. 4 words, under oath, in court. I knew not what I did. The investigation moved fast. Superintendent Campbell, the head of Brooklyn detectives, deduced a few things quickly. The German newspaper suggested a German killer. The crime scene suggested a woman was present. It was panicked, multi-step disposal, not a clean execution. The Baltimore Sun reported that when detectives arrived at 93 North 3rd Street, Fuchs answered the door and pretended to speak very poor English, offering a false trail to send investigators elsewhere. Then Detective Corwin spotted blood on Fuchs's pants. A witness made a positive ID. When they searched the apartment, they found everything, including, in Fuchs' pocket, William Simmons' watch. He had kept it. Detective Frost was quoted as saying he had never known such a horrible butchery. But here's the detail that unsettled me more than almost anything else. At the station house, while the physical evidence was still being cataloged, the papers described Fuchs as smilingly regaling the police officers around him. When a photographer came to document him, he smoothed his hair for a better look in the camera. The Brooklyn Daily Times reported he was much attractive to the great attention his awful crime had attracted to him. I don't have a psychological framework for that. I'll just leave it there. On February 1st, Mr. Jones, Simmons' employer, personally accompanied the casket on the morning train back to Derby, Connecticut. The King Hiram Lodge Masons were waiting alongside what the papers called an immense concourse of people, a town turning out to receive its own. Back in Brooklyn, the workers at Jones and Henry said of Fuchs, they were all afraid of him. The trial was in April of 1876. Fuchs was described as cool and self-possessed throughout. His defense was temporary insanity. During cross-examination, when William Simmons' watch was introduced as evidence, Fuchs reached out and grabbed it and said, quote, that's mine, end quote. The gallery laughed. When testimony about the oven was read aloud, Fuchs said, it's a lie. The jury didn't buy it. Convicted of murder in the 2nd degree, he was sentenced to hang on June 2nd, 1876. He was sent to Raymond Street Jail, condemned cell number 13. In cell number 14 was Passage Rubenstein, awaiting execution for a separate, chilling murder. They shared a language, or enough of an overlap between German and Yiddish, and the papers noted that they would talk through the steam pipe wall in the early mornings. What they said remains unrecorded, but I really do wonder. On May 26, a reporter from Brooklyn Union came to the jail with news. Governor Tilden had commuted Fuchs's sentence. He wouldn't hang. The reporter's description of what happened next is extraordinary. Fuchs was half asleep when the reporter arrived. His eyes twinkled. That's the word the union used. Then he buried his face in a handkerchief and sobbed bitterly. He came to the bars and said, "I thank you, sir." Through the wall, Rubenstein called out, "Well, that's good. I guess we have some beer." Fuchs went to the back of his cell and retrieved 2 nickels he'd been saving. He said, "Let's have a bottle of root beer." And I just want to stop and pause and let you know that the way the papers spelled out these quotes are how I said them. For instance, they wrote, quote, "I thank you, sir," TANK. So I'm not trying to be funny. That's how it was written in the papers. Anyway, so they made some plans to get root beer. So Fuchs, he stood at the bar, tears on his cheeks, saying, "That's good, that's good." Then came the line that stayed with me longer than anything else in the record. "That it's right for me, 'cause how you like dat man with my wife, it all right now." He reached his chubby hand, the paper's words, through the bars and shook the reporter's hand. "I thank you, sir, I thank you." Fuchs was transferred to Sing Sing and eventually to the insane ward at Auburn Prison, where he died on July 14th, 1882. A post-mortem found his brain was, quote, "organically diseased," end quote. Whether that was accurate or just a convenient explanation from the prison system, I don't know. The Brooklyn Union printed a short notice and concluded, "Justice calmly but firmly held her place." And that's where the coverage ends. Fuchs dies, Simmons is buried, case closed. Most historians who would find this story would treat it as a brutal Victorian murder case notable for the press coverage and leave it at that. But the newspapers moved on and I couldn't. Something happened while I was researching. I kept going back to something, not Fuchs and not even Simmons really. I kept going back to the doll. William Simmons brought a doll for the little girl. Ellen went to bed around 9 and then she woke up in an apartment that had become a horror scene with a stepfather who had done the unthinkable and a mother who had been sent for a beer and came back to that reality. She was 8 years old. And every single article I read, 18 articles across 6 different papers, stopped caring about her. The moment she was no longer useful as a witness or a plot point, she vanished from the record, but I didn't stop looking. This is where the episode changes, because trying to follow a child through a historical record when history has decided she doesn't matter is a specific kind of frustration. You start with the name, Ellen Kehoe. Then you discover the name is unstable. She's Ellen in the trial. She's Helen in a census record. She's Nellie in another context. An incredibly common Irish Catholic diminutive used interchangeably. It makes genealogical research a nightmare. You never know if you're chasing the same person or 3 different people with similar names. You hit false leads and dead ends, you find a match, but one detail is wrong, the age, the neighborhood, and you start over. That feeling is a lot like chasing someone who doesn't want to be found. Or, more accurately, someone history decided wasn't worth keeping track of. She wasn't a victim, a murderer, a society woman, or a property owner. She was an 8-year-old Irish Catholic girl in Greenpoint, the daughter of a dead man and the stepdaughter of a murderer. There was no mechanism for tracking her. And then, Brooklyn Daily Times, April 13th, 1876, one small paragraph, easy to miss. Quote, "Ellen Kehoe, stepdaughter of Andreas Fuchs, the convicted murderer, was yesterday sent to the house of the Good Shepherd, her mother being deemed an improper person to have the care of the child." End quote. The same week her stepfather was convicted, the state removed 8-year-old Ellen from her mother and placed her in a Catholic institution. Her mother, deemed improper, her stepfather, a convicted murderer, Ellen, 8 years old, sent away. The House of the Good Shepherd was run by the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, a residential institution for girls considered to be in, quote, moral danger or without proper guardianship. Some girls had done something wrong, some had done nothing at all except exist in the wrong situation. And Ellen's situation was, by any measure, wrong. Imagine her arriving there, trying to understand what was happening to her in April of 1876. And then she disappears from the record for 81 years. I went through the census records, city directories, immigration logs, death records, parish files, anything with an Ellen, Helen, or a Nellie Kehoe in Brooklyn. It's slow, quiet work. You spend hours going nowhere, looking for a single sentence that changes everything. And I found it. Greenpoint Weekly Star, April 12, 1957. A death notice. Nellie Kehoe of 186 Eckford Street, Greenpoint, Brooklyn, died April 5, 1957. Survived by her sister, Mrs. Anna Hickey, and 3 nieces. Born in Greenpoint, lived there her entire life. Funeral at Hugh A. Reed Funeral Home on Franklin Street. Solemn Requiem Mass at St. Anthony of Padua. Buried at Calvary Cemetery in Queens. If the timeline holds, if this is the same Ellen Kehoe born in the 1860s, she would have been approximately 89 years old when she died. She died as Nellie Kehoe. She kept her father's name. Michael Kehoe, the man from County Waterford who died before she was old enough to remember him. Not Fuchs, not anyone else's. Her name. She came back to Greenpoint and she stayed. I want to sit with that for a moment because it deserves the space. This child who was in the apartment on the night of January 27th, 1876, who testified at a murder trial at age 8, who was taken from her mother and sent to an institution, she came back. 186 Eckford Street is less than a mile from 93 North 3rd Street. She spent the rest of her life there. She watched Greenpoint change across 8 decades. She was there when the neighborhood became majority Polish through both world wars. When the ironworks closed, she outlived Andreas Fuchs by 75 years. She outlived the murder itself by 81. She died quietly in the very neighborhood where the worst thing she ever saw happened, surrounded, according to the notice, by a sister and 3 nieces. And nobody, as far as I can tell, put her story together until now. Nobody followed her from that one paragraph in April of 1876 to that death notice in April of 1957. Nobody traced the arc or asked what 81 years looks like when it starts in a place like that. I'm not going to pretend I know what her life was like. The record doesn't show me that. I only know the beginning and the end. I know she was a child in a terrible situation, and I know she died an old woman in the neighborhood where she was born, with the same name she was born with. That's all the record gives me. But it's enough to know she was real. She wasn't just a footnote to a crime. She had a life. Now I want to go back to the beginning. The Bucks County Gazette, February 3rd, 1876. The article about the Brooklyn Spiritualist trying to contact the spirit of a murdered man and receiving nothing but disconnected, senseless gibberish. The spiritualists thought that they were trying to hear from William Simmons. They thought that was the story. A murdered man, unjustly killed, maybe still present in some way. They sat in their seance rooms, waited, and got static, nothing coherent. I'm not going to tell you the seance worked or that anything supernatural happened here. That isn't the claim. but I keep thinking about what they were actually doing. They were paying attention. They were saying this person existed, this person was taken, and someone should sit in the dark and think about him. That impulse, however you feel about the methodology, is something, it's not nothing. 150 years later, I wasn't looking for William Simmons or Andreas Fuchs. I was looking for spiritualist history, and I found a 3-line article that asked a question I couldn't stop trying to answer. And what I found at the end of the rabbit hole wasn't a ghost. It was history itself becoming the ghost. It was Ellen. Nellie Kehoe, born in this neighborhood, died in this neighborhood, keeping her own name for 89 years. She left behind a family who presumably had no idea what she had ever survived as a child, or who had sat down across from her when she was 8 years old and brought her a doll. Maybe that's all a haunting really is. Not a spirit or a presence or disconnected gibberish from the other side, just a person, a life. A life history decided wasn't worth reading. A little girl sent away who came home anyway, who stayed for as long as she was there to stay. Nobody asked, nobody wrote it down, nobody sat in the dark and thought about her until, I guess, now. Well, that's the episode. Thank you for listening. Seriously, if you made it here, thank you. This one meant something to me, and I hope it meant something to you too. If you want to read any of the original sources, I'll have links in the show notes. The Gazette, the Daily Eagle, the Brooklyn Union, all of them. I've also included a Find the Grave memorial number, 22358. Guys, I got that thing where I mix up numbers. So I'll put it on the screen, but it's 223-518-625, which I found at the end of all of this. And it was its own quiet moment. Nellie Kehoe. She was real. This might be nothing, but then again,